Hey guys, what is up? And welcome to the second installment in my Getting Good series. I've actually never been more excited in the history of my channel actually to be making videos as I am right now. I've got so many ideas in mind. We'll have to see how many of them I get a chance to make. As many of you have probably already surmised, I'm against Bdubzs here, and Bdubzs is very graciously had quite a few duels with me over the past 3 or 4 days, I'd say, resulting in roughly 5 hours or so of duels between the two of us. And I have to say, there is really nothing scarier to me in this game than Bdubzs with a curved sword in my face. And you can see here, he's just making me look absolutely ridiculous. And I know probably for some of you, you're watching this and you're thinking, geez, like, come on, man, reaction roll, stop panic rolling. And believe me, I tell myself the same thing every time we fight, every duel, I say the same thing. But his mix up game is so strong and his reads are so strong. He knows exactly what you're going to do before you do it. And it just creates such a massive amount of pressure, the likes of which I've really never encountered with any other player. I think you just have to fight players of this caliber over and over to help discipline those sorts of reflexes because truthfully, when I play a curved sword user normally, I have no trouble reaction rolling their R1s, in large part because they're somewhat predictable. Even if you don't know exactly when they're coming out, you know about when people like to attack and you're poised to roll. But when somebody like Bdubzs mixes it up so effectively, it makes it really, really difficult to roll his attacks on reaction. I knew he was going to be a beast when I went to fight him. But every time I have fights with him, I'm just reminded again and again of how strong a player he is. And you'll see there's so many lessons that I learned from these duels. I've actually fought with him before. Probably the first time was over a year ago, actually as a result of Dom Perignone's series that she was doing for a while on Reddit. And then I also had some fights with him maybe 8 months ago or so, and I am learning, but I'm also learning what makes him effective. The curve sword mix-up game is obviously a big part of it, but he's got to get in close to you in order to be able to do that. And I have to say, like, the things that I've learned maybe even more so than his curve sword mix-up game, his spacing is out of this world, and so much so that I truthfully didn't even know that spacing of that type was actually even possible until I fought him. I'm going to show you some examples here through these duels. It's really spellbinding. He's got an ability you'll see later when I'm using the four-prong plow. He consistently spaces out my running attacks with the four-prong plow. He almost never has to roll it, and he's always able to stay just at the edge of where I'm attacking. And over the course of 3 days, there were 2 days where we had a really good connection. You're looking at one of our good connection days here. But then there was another day where we actually had some really piss poor connectivity, and it hampered his ability to space just a bit. But it's really actually really entertaining to play him on a really good connection just because you can see how effectively he can space. And he does a really good job against my straight sword, obviously, which is impressive. But it's even more impressive in my view when he does it on the four-prong plow. And as you've probably already noticed, one of the things that makes him difficult to fight is if he picks up on the fact that you're not going to just start panic rolling, that he starts doing a lot of things to get inside your head. You'll see the aggressive L1 pumping. The aggressive L1 pumping is really difficult for me to deal with. And I wish I had saved the fights from our first day of fighting because, truthfully, I did a better job the first day than I did this day. And I'm not sure why, but I was just having a really hard time with the fakes. And even though I normally don't panic roll that much, I mean, he makes me feel like I'm just a new player. And I mean, that spacing, he just dances around the edge of that four-prong plow. And when you fight him, even if you successfully reaction roll 8 or 9 of his attacks in a row, all it really takes is for him to get in your kitchen one time and start that mix-up game. And if your rolling is not perfectly on point, then you are just going to get absolutely crushed. And something else interesting that I learned, I experimented a bit where if I thought like he was getting too close, I would just start blindly panic rolling. And what I discovered is that in the average case, that's actually not a bad strategy. It's not an optimal strategy, but his mix-up game is so strong that if you stand there and try to reaction roll everything, a lot of times he'll actually go worse for you because he knows exactly what timings to exploit to mess with your head. And of course, on a good connection like this one, he can roll catch on reaction. So as soon as he's able to bait you into a roll, well, then all of a sudden now he can roll catch you and just start the abuse all over again. I mentioned his spacing is exquisite. His reads and his timing and his ability to reaction roll your attacks. I mean, you can see I've got the hand axe here, and that's not easy to reaction roll. I think it's probably about as fast as a curved sword. And I did not have a lot of luck punishing him with that. I mean, I got him sometimes, but not that many times. And I think we probably had, I would guess, 40 to 50 fights overall, and I think I won 4 of them. And I don't know that I ever beat his curved sword. One of the things you'll see here is actually I've got a number of clips with videos with him playing other than the curved sword. And I think a lot of people think that the only reason Bdubzs is any good is because of that curved sword. That is not true. I can tell you firsthand, I've seen how the man plays. I mean, the curved sword, I think, unlocks his ability to express his skill in a way that no other weapon could. But just like, if you're a bad driver, putting you in the seat of a expensive race car is not going to make you a great driver. Similarly, the PKCS does not make one a good duelist. And I'm sure we've all had experiences against people who thought otherwise. They had a curved sword and you're absolutely able to annihilate them. So you'll see some of his other builds that I fought against. None were nearly as effective as his curved sword build, obviously. And I think I beat some of those other builds 3 or 4 times throughout all these fights, but I don't believe I ever beat his curved sword. In fact, I fought his curved sword in my life probably close to 100 times, and I've only had 1 victory, and even that victory was somewhat hollow because he was screwing around with trying to parry me. I don't even think he was trying that hard. And actually, how hard he tries is another interesting topic because I think he's got what I would call at least 5 or 6 different sort of gears of effort that he'll put out depending on his opponent and depending on the situation. And you'll see different levels of effort coming from him. Like usually randoms at Pontiff, he goes pretty easy. I would say me before, he probably went at like level 2. Nowadays, he goes against me at like level 3 or 4. Unless I actually get an advantage in the fight where I've got a substantial life lead and he's behind, and then I can see him kick it up to the next gear, which is like gear 4 or 5. And then I think his final gear is reserved generally for tournaments and maybe for other tryhards, but I'm still not good enough to get him to show me that final level. And it's not an ego thing on his part. I think he's just, you play to your opponents, and we all do that to some extent. Just a really impressive player. Taught me an awful lot, taught me a lot about what's possible and just how much better I can get as a duelist. So I think I mentioned that Bdubzs fought me with a number of weapons other than the curved sword. I won't get a chance to show them all to you today, unfortunately, or this video would be like 2 hours long. But just to name some of the weapons, multiple different daggers, at least 3 different curved swords, great sword, ultra great sword, including the ring knight paired great swords, which we'll see coming up in a little bit, spears, the 4-prong plow. I think just about everything under the sun he played against me with. And like I said, I did manage to eke out some victories in a couple of places, but never against the curved sword. He's just too good with that for me to be able to get any victories. One kind of sad note is during these entire fights, he and I were in a party together and we were talking. And he had a lot of interesting things to say about the gameplay, my gameplay, his gameplay, Dark Souls in general. And I really wanted to incorporate a lot of that into the video today. but trying to combine that with my commentary, all the while making sure that what he was talking about at the time was relevant to what was happening on the screen. It just proved to be too difficult. Plus, my voice was kind of buried in the mix for whatever reason. It was a little hard to hear. And I just thought that's going to be too tough to actually do and make worthwhile. And right here you see I'm actually trying sword and board, which is a bad idea on my part just because I'm not good with a shield, as you can see. I don't use it properly. I don't really know what I'm doing with it. And so I think I gave this up after just maybe this one fight. I just realized this isn't going to work. So I mentioned too that I've got a lot of ideas for some upcoming videos. I'm really pleased because a number of folks in the sort of try-hard duelist community have heard about what I'm trying to do. A number of them have expressed interest, and I've actually had some duels against some other players, some really good players. I'll be talking more about that in a future video, as well as maybe at a macro level some more about what I've learned. I'm also going to be talking about maybe what you might call like try-hard invaders. So I know there's been a lot of talk in the comments, and I've talked a little bit about it. Hazy, I think, probably put it best and left a number of really good comments on my last video about invaders versus duelists, and not just featuring duelists, because there's lots of good invaders, and obviously you're dealing with two different sets of problems, duelists versus invaders. And I thought about talking about that in this video, but what I decided ultimately is I'm going to make a separate video dealing with that topic in its entirety, just because there's a lot there that I want to talk about. And I don't want to clutter this video with too much of that. So expect that in an upcoming video. I will be fighting against some other invaders as part of this series. There's plenty to learn. But again, I'll get into more detail about that in an upcoming video. So let me talk more about maybe what I've learned from fighting Bdubzs, especially in these most recent fights. Some things obviously I already knew. I knew about his curve sword mix-up game. I knew he was just a very skilled player, very good player. I mean, you could credibly make the argument that he's the best player in Dark Souls 3. You could say best Dark Souls 3 duelist if that makes you happier. But I think inarguably he's in the top echelon of players. And the thing that I'm realizing is that, at least in terms of dueling skill, the gulf between the top, say, 20 or 30 try-hard duelists and everyone else is a lot wider than I ever thought. And I think probably the reason is because you can only get as good as your opponents. You're always going to be constrained in terms of your skill growth by the quality of your opposition. If your opponents are bad, you're never going to be able to get very good against them. That's just a simple reality. And because I think these guys all hang out, they all fight against one another frequently, that's helped them all elevate the level of their game. And you'll just never, ever be able to get to that point unless you two are dueling against them on a regular and frequent basis. So another thing that I've learned from fighting against tryhards like Bdubzs is you best not fall into predictable patterns. A lot of these top tier duelists, and this is also true of top tier invaders, they are excellent at picking up patterns of behavior, making predictions, and then punishing the crap out of you when their predictions come true. So you've always got to be thinking about mixing it up, always forcing yourself to do things that you haven't done before. Just acting in a way that's different than what your opponent expects. I found myself falling into patterns all too frequently. And you can see one of the things I noticed that I was doing poorly is when Bdubzs starts cranking up the pressure, there's a lot of times where I would have been better off counterattacking instead of getting on the defensive. But it's one thing to say that, but when he brings the pressure, it's really hard to think about that. And one thing that I've learned is that when you're playing against a player that you think is outclassing you and is better than you, it's almost like all your mental energy gets funneled into defensive mode. And I've observed before that I think players tend to do things like backpedal when they feel like they're being outclassed, when the other player's outplaying them. They're trying to figure out options. They don't know what to do. I've really had that reinforced playing against players that are better than me, because it's all too easy to just go into like almost like survival mode, where you even just stop attacking and you're just trying to figure out a way to stay alive. And it totally brings a different sense now when I invade and I see players doing that to me. And it makes me realize that they're feeling exactly the same thing that I feel when I'm playing a guy like Bdubzs. And I'm also trying to figure out how to get better at my spacing. Like I've been watching how Bdubzs consistently is able to space out my running attacks on my spears. I mean, he does it to all the weapons, but I think it's just really unbelievable that he's able to do it on my spear so consistently, and trying to understand something of his movement. And one thing that it did is it got me thinking a lot more, as he's running around and dancing around. In my mind, I'm thinking about, okay, if he did a running attack right now, where would I need to be to avoid that? And actually, in some of the duels that I've had outside of the tryhards, like randoms in the arena, and you can see here, by the way, these fights were on our higher latency day, so the hits aren't quite as clean. We end up trading in some cases where maybe we shouldn't have. But it's really improved my spacing already, because it's almost like just a different mindset of trying to outspace and be able to be in a position to whiff punish. And the one thing about the hand axe is it doesn't do very well at whiff punishing. And in fact, you'll see this is sort of a mirror match, but Bdubzs is using a straight sword instead of the hand axe. And I suspect the reason is because he's got the reach with the straight sword. So if you're really good at spacing, a straight sword is going to be better to whiff punish. The hand axe is good at whiff punishing up close, but your spacing really has to be on point. And against a player like Bdubzs, my spacing isn't ever really likely to be in a place where I can do that, where I can have the right spacing to whiff punish with the hand axe. Plus, in order to whiff punish a guy like him, you really need to be starting your whiff punish before his attack is even complete, because if he knows that if he misspaces an attack, he's already on red alert and he's going to be looking for that counter attack, that attempt at a whiff punish, which made me realize too that a lot of what I would call whiff punishes, really properly considered, aren't true whiff punishes. It's more just an opponent's failure to evade on time. I know I've mentioned before that I would encourage people, if they haven't had a chance, to get an opportunity to have some duels against somebody who's really good like Bdubzs. It obviously doesn't have to be him, but somebody of his skill level. Because one thing that I've noticed from watching other tryhard fights, it can be very difficult to assess just how skilled they are from watching somebody else play them. Actually, you probably get a better idea watching me than watching Attorney, just because I'm probably closer to the skill level of people watching this than Attorney player is, at least I imagine for most people watching this. And you can see how he's able to punish me. But when you see two tryhards in Attorney, they don't seem to be doing anything too notable. And that's mostly, I think, simply because they're both so skilled that they both have to be careful and wary of the other player. And there was one of my few victories as I got my tears popped. But I've actually got an announcement coming up that may make it easier for some of you to actually have that opportunity. You see here, obviously, I've switched over to the curved sword. I wanted to see how I might fare against Bdubzs with the curved sword, and really trying to, in kind of real time, take some of the lessons that I'd learned from him. And the thing is, like, until I get comfortable with him being up close, I really can't assert myself the way that I want to. Like, I let him push me around way too much. But the reason is I'm just not comfortable standing in up close to him most of the time. Now, if he doesn't have the curved sword, I am a bit more comfortable, but I'm still not comfortable enough. It's like that's almost like a barrier to entry. Until I'm comfortable with him in my face up close, you can see there I actually stood my ground because I had the curved sword. I was able to feel empowered to not feel like I had to immediately go in defensive mode. This is his Ring Knight paired greatsword build. This thing was actually pretty terrifying. There were actually a lot of things about this, and there you see I'm trying to space out the L1 and whiff punish. But there were a number of features of this weapon that I actually didn't know about. For example, because I imagine most of us have only encountered this weapon in ganks. The L1, the wheelbarrow, if you're too close when he initiates that move, there's a stun effect. You actually get stunned in place and you cannot avoid the attack. The same thing is true for the weapon art that throws the flame. When the swords bang down on the ground, you get stunned into place. And if you're too close to him, you'll get stunned into place and you cannot escape the attack. Against the ring knight paired greatswords, I play around with a lot of different types of rolling. Generally, rolling into him is a better approach, though that has a risk of its own. And even if I were able to, get 5, 6, 7 good hits in against him, the trouble was all it took was for him to get me in one combo would effectively erase all the progress that I had made. So I mentioned that I've got a lot of interesting videos planned for the channel. I've got some events coming up. There'll be an announcement about a stream coming up here shortly. I really hope you guys all stay tuned. I hope you guys are having as much fun with this as I am. There's a lot more to come. As I said, I've never been more excited. Thank you so much to Bdubzs for his time and the duels and the fights and all the things that he taught me. Take care, guys.